He was a ghost, an illegal immigrant who managed one of the most famous people on earth. He called himself Colonel Tom Parker. But that wasn't his name. He wasn't a colonel. He wasn't even an American. He built a legend and took half of everything. He kept his star, Elvis Presley, trapped in America. Why? Was he running from something? Well, a dark secret back in his home country of the Netherlands? Maybe even a murder. He was a carnival huckster who played the biggest game of his life with the biggest star in the world. He won, but did Elvis lose? What was real and what was the con? These are the questions that still hang in the air long after the music has faded. Number 18, what was his greatest con? It is the central question of his entire life. Was it a single act, or was the whole thing, the entire persona, the greatest con of all? You could argue his greatest con was the name itself, Tom Parker. It sounded solid. Or American, trustworthy. He stole it from a real U.S. Army officer he met in Florida. The real Captain Tom Parker was a recruitment officer. The man who would become the colonel just took the name and ran with it. It was a blank slate. It allowed Andreas van Kuijk, a Dutch national with no papers, to simply vanish. He became someone else entirely. That new identity let him do everything that followed. But maybe the con was the title. The Colonel! It was completely fake. It was an honorary title given to him in 1948 by Jimmy Davis, the governor of Louisiana. Parker was managing country singer Eddie Arnold at the time. He did some work for Davis's gubernatorial campaign. As a thank you, Davis made him an honorary colonel in the Louisiana State Militia. That was it. No military service earned it, no rank was achieved, but Parker saw its power. A manager, just a guy, a colonel, is a commander. It projects authority. It demands respect. He used it for the rest of his life. He wore it like a costume. He made everyone call him it, the press, Elvis, even his own wife. The title became an impenetrable shield. It made a carnival barker sound like a strategist. Then there is the financial con. The 50% commission. No manager took 50%. The industry standard was 10 to 15%, maybe 25% for an unknown artist who needed a lot of development. Parker demanded 50% of everything Elvis earned. And he got it. He convinced a young Elvis and his financially naive father, Vernon, that he was more than a manager. He was a partner. He would be totally dedicated to Elvis, and for that total dedication, he deserved half. Alana Nash, in her definitive biography, The Colonel, details how he framed it as an us against the world deal. He made it seem like he was protecting Elvis from the sharks, all while being the biggest shark himself. This contract was the engine of his wealth and the source of Elvis's financial bondage. But maybe the greatest con was more subtle. It was the illusion of control, the idea that he alone was responsible for Elvis's success. Sam Phillips at Sun Records discovered Elvis's sound. The musicians, Scotty Moore and Bill Black, helped create it. Elvis himself was the raw, explosive talent. Parker didn't create any of that. He just saw it. He recognized the winning ticket when it walked in the door. His genius wasn't in musical creation, but in marketing and exploitation. He sold the ticket, he sold it over and over, he created the merchandise machine, the I Hate Elvis badges alongside the I Love Elvis ones, selling to both sides. He convinced the world, and maybe even Elvis, that without him, the whole thing would fall apart. He made himself seem indispensable. The ultimate con, though, might have been the one he pulled on himself. Did Andreas van Kuijk believe his own lies? When he looked in the mirror, did he see a Dutch immigrant hiding from a possible crime? Or did he see Colonel Tom Parker, the brilliant strategist, the star maker? He lived the role so completely for over 50 years that the line must have blurred. He never broke character, not once. He maintained the fiction until the very end, even after Elvis was gone and his own health was failing. He was trapped inside the character he created. The con became his reality. He built a cage for Elvis, but in the process, he built one for himself too. He could never go home. He could never be Andreas again. He had to be the Colonel forever. That might be the most mind-bending part of all. The con man who gets so lost in the con that he can't find his way out. So what do we still not know? Was there one single moment where he decided to become Tom Parker, or was it a slow, gradual slide into a new identity? Did he ever feel guilt for what he did to Andreas van Kuijk, the young man he left behind? And when he was alone with no one to perform for, who was he really? Number 17, how did a man with no legal identity operate for 50 years? This is one of the most baffling parts of the story. Think about it. A man arrives in a country with no passport, no visa, no birth certificate. He has no legal right to be there. Yet he proceeds to manage the most famous entertainer in the world. He signs multi-million-dollar contracts with major corporations like RCA and Paramount Pictures. He deals with lawyers, accountants, and government agencies, and he does it all for half a century without being deported or even officially discovered. How is this possible? The answer lies in a combination of cunning, circumstance, and the world he operated in. When Andreas van Kuijk jumped ship and arrived in America in 1929, the system was much looser than it is today. There was no centralized digital database of identities. Social Security was still years away from being implemented. It was easier to simply invent a person and become them. He first enlisted in the U.S. Army under the name Tom Parker. This was his first masterstroke. A military record, even a troubled one, created a paper trail. It grounded the fictional Tom Parker in a real American institution. It gave him a history. He was a master of deflection and intimidation. He built a persona, the loud cigar-chomping, deal-making colonel that was so overpowering it simply bowled people over. People were focused on the performance, not the man behind it. When questions about his past came up, he would lie, get angry, or change the subject. In his book, Elvis and the Colonel, biographer Dirk Valenga notes how Parker would create elaborate, folksy stories about his orphan past in Huntington, West Virginia. He claimed he ran away to join the circus. These stories were charming and, more importantly, a complete smokescreen. Who would question a man with such a colorful, all-American backstory? His business dealings were also structured to protect him. He never handled the money directly in a way that would require a passport or a birth certificate for identification. Vernon Presley was president of Elvis Presley Enterprises. The money flowed through business accounts. The Colonel was a consultant, a manager, a partner. His payments were funneled through his own companies. He built a fortress of paperwork around himself, all of it under his assumed name. And he had lawyers and accountants who likely never thought to ask for a Dutch birth certificate. Why would they? He was the Colonel. His identity was self-evident because he performed it so convincingly. There was also a powerful incentive for others to keep quiet. As long as the money was flowing, nobody at RCA or in Hollywood wanted to upset the apple cart. Exposing the Colonel as an illegal immigrant would create a massive scandal. It could void contracts, it could jeopardize the entire Elvis Presley money machine. It was better for everyone involved to just not ask too many questions. The Colonel's secret was protected by a wall of mutual financial interest. Anyone who got close to the truth was either pushed out or learned to look the other way. The closest he ever came to being exposed was likely when Elvis was drafted into the army in 1958. Elvis wanted to join special services where he could entertain the troops. The Colonel insisted he serve as a regular soldier. Many believe this was to avoid Elvis being sent on a European tour. If Elvis went to Europe, the Colonel, his manager, would be expected to go with him. But the Colonel couldn't. He had no passport. He couldn't apply for one because he had no birth certificate. He would have been exposed as Andreas van Kuijk, a man who had deserted that very same U.S. Army years earlier. So he convinced Elvis and the world that serving as a regular GI was the patriotic, all-American thing to do. It was a brilliant move that protected his secret at the expense of Elvis's comfort. He gambled that no one would connect the dots, and no one did for decades. What are the lingering questions here? How many people in power actually knew his secret and chose to ignore it? Did any government agency, like the IRS, ever flag his lack of a social security number or birth record and get stonewalled? And what would have happened if a single determined journalist or lawyer in the 1950s had decided to dig into where exactly Tom Parker from Huntington, West Virginia, was actually born? Number 16, did anyone ever challenge his control? Yes, but they almost always failed. The Colonel's grip on Elvis was legendary. He built a wall around his client, isolating him from outside influences. He controlled access, information, and finances. Challenging the Colonel meant risking your career, your friendship with Elvis, and your place in the inner circle. It was a risk very few were willing to take. Early on, the challenges were minor. Other managers and promoters tried to woo Elvis away in 1955 and 1956, but Parker was ruthless. He outmaneuvered them, made promises he may or may not have intended to keep, and secured his exclusive contract. He convinced Elvis and his parents that only he could navigate the treacherous waters of national stardom. Once the contracts were signed, his position was legally secure. The musicians around Elvis certainly chafed under his control. Scotty Moore and Bill Black, the original Blue Moon Boys, were essential to Elvis's early sound. Yet Parker treated them like hired hands. In 1957, they quit the band over a financial dispute. As detailed in Peter Grolnick's book Last Train to Memphis, they were making very little money while Elvis and the Colonel were becoming millionaires. They approached Elvis directly, but Elvis, ever loyal to the Colonel and non-confrontational by nature, deferred to his manager. The Colonel wouldn't budge. He let them walk. It was a clear message to everyone: no one is indispensable except Elvis and me. And I control Elvis. The so-called Memphis Mafia, Elvis's group of friends and bodyguards, often resented the Colonel. They saw his tight-fisted control, and what they considered his poor management choices, especially during the movie years. The men like Lamar Fike and Marty Lacker were vocal in their private criticism. They saw how the bad movie scripts were hurting Elvis's creativity and spirit, but they were powerless. They worked for Elvis, and Elvis trusted the Colonel. To challenge Parker directly was to risk being exiled from the group, which for many of them was their entire world. The Colonel held all the cards because he controlled the person they all depended on. The most significant challenge to the Colonel's authority came in 1968. Elvis was tired of making terrible movies. He was creatively starved, his career was in a slump, a television special was planned. The Colonel's vision for it was a cozy, bland Christmas special. Elvis would sing a few carols, say goodnight, and that would be it. A young, ambitious director named Steve Binder was hired. Binder saw the fire still inside Elvis. He, along with others like Elvis's friend Jerry Schilling, wanted to do something raw and exciting. They wanted to remind the world that Elvis was the king of rock and roll, not some B-movie crooner. This led to a direct confrontation. Binder and his team secretly planned the iconic black leather stand-up segments of what would become the '68 comeback special. The Colonel was furious. He hated the raw sexual energy of it. He saw it as a step backward. He felt he was losing control. At one point, according to Schilling's memoir, Me and a Guy Named Elvis, the Colonel confronted Binder backstage, screaming at him. Binder didn't back down. More importantly, Elvis, for one of the few times in his career, stood up to his manager. He sided with Binder. He wanted to do the show his way. He was rejuvenated, and he went out and delivered one of the greatest performances of his life. The special was a massive success. It was a brief moment when the prisoner broke free from the warden. But it didn't last. The Colonel quickly reasserted his control, using the success of the special to book Elvis into a grueling, long-term engagement in Las Vegas. He had won the war, even if he lost that one battle. After Elvis's death, the ultimate challenge came from the law. In 1980, Judge Blanchard E. Toole, a probate court judge in Memphis, appointed a lawyer named Blanchard Toole to investigate the Colonel's management of the Elvis Presley estate. The investigation found that the Colonel's 50% commission was exorbitant and that his management after Elvis's death was unethical. He was essentially working for himself, not for the benefit of the estate. A lawsuit was filed. The Colonel was eventually forced to sell his rights to Elvis's recordings back to RCA and sever his ties with the estate. In the end, it took a court of law to do what no single person could: break Colonel Tom Parker's control over Elvis Presley. So what mysteries remain? Were there other secret rebellions by Elvis that we don't know about? Did any of the studio heads or record executives ever try to go around the Colonel to deal with Elvis directly? And if so, how did he shut them down? And what was the final conversation between Elvis and the Colonel really like? Was it just business, or did Elvis ever truly question the man who ran his life? Number 15, did he have a family? He left behind in the Netherlands. Yes, he did, and this is not just a footnote, it is the key to understanding his entire life in America. The man who presented himself as a lone wolf, an orphan who pulled himself up by his bootstraps, was actually the fifth of 11 children from a stable, working-class family in Breda, a city in the southern Netherlands. His name was Andreas van Kuijk, but his family called him Dries. His father, Adam van Kuijk, was a former soldier who worked as a delivery driver. His mother, Maria, was a homemaker. By all accounts, it was a normal family life. And Dries was known as a bit of a character, a storyteller, someone who loved circuses and carnivals. This part of his legend was true. He did work for carnivals in his youth, learning the art of the con, how to attract a crowd, and how to separate people from their money. This was his true education. In May 1929, when he was 20 years old, he just disappeared. He left without saying goodbye to his family. They had no idea where he had gone. For years, they heard nothing. Imagine the pain and confusion for his parents, his brothers, and his sisters. They filed a missing persons report. They searched, but it was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. The story was pieced together decades later by Dutch journalists and biographers, most notably Dirk Verlenge. They discovered that the Van Kuijk family did eventually receive a letter from their lost son. He was in America. He told them he had a new life and a new name. He asked them to not try and find him. He essentially cut himself off from them. There was some sporadic contact over the years. His brother Ad came to America once, but the colonel reportedly kept him at a distance. He sent money home to his mother, but he never, ever went back. Not for his father's funeral. Not for his mother's funeral, not for any wedding, birth, or family event. This decision to completely sever ties with his past is profound. It wasn't just about starting a new life, it was about erasing the old one. This goes beyond simple ambition. It suggests he was hiding from something or that the pain of his past was too much to bear. When Elvis was stationed in Germany with the US Army, he was only a few hours' drive from Breda. It would have been the perfect opportunity for the colonel to visit his family, perhaps even with Elvis, in a way that wouldn't require a passport back into the US. He still refused. The wall between Andreas van Kuijk and Tom Parker had to remain absolute. His Dutch family knew who he was. They saw pictures of the famous Colonel Tom Parker, manager of Elvis Presley, in the newspapers. They recognized him as their dries. They wrote to him. According to Alana Nash's research, his sister Marie's letters were particularly heartbreaking. She begged him to come home to see their ailing mother before she died. He never replied to those pleas. He sent a check after his mother passed away. The existence of his family makes his American persona all the more fraudulent. He wasn't an orphan, he wasn't alone, he had a home, he chose to abandon it. He chose to let his family believe he was lost, and then to keep them at arm's length once they found him. The emotional cost of this decision, both for him and for them, must have been immense. It adds a layer of tragedy to the story of the cunning, successful manager. He gained the world, but he lost his home, his name, and his family, and he did it all by choice. So, what are the unanswered questions? Did he ever write a letter, now lost to history, explaining to his family why he really left? Did his siblings feel anger or pity for the brother who became a famous stranger? And in his final, quiet moments, did his thoughts turn to his life as the colonel, or to his childhood as Andreas van Kuijk on the streets of Breda? Number 14, what happened to him after Elvis died? The death of Elvis Presley on August 16, 1977, was the end of an era. For most people, it was the loss of a cultural icon. For Colonel Tom Parker, it was the loss of his sole client, his attraction, and the source of his entire income and identity for over 2 decades. Many people assumed his career was over. They were wrong. The Colonel's work was just beginning. His behavior in the immediate aftermath of Elvis's death was bizarre and telling. While the world mourned, the Colonel was in business mode. He showed up at Graceland on the day of the funeral wearing a Hawaiian shirt and a baseball cap. He seemed more concerned with securing his future role than with grieving. He immediately met with Elvis's father, Vernon, who was devastated and in poor health. He convinced Vernon to sign an agreement that kept him on as the manager of Elvis's estate, still at his exorbitant commission. The Elvis money machine had to keep rolling, and the Colonel intended to remain at the controls. For the next few years, he did just that. He licensed Elvis's image for all sorts of merchandise, some of it tasteful, much of it cheap and tacky. He approved new album releases, repackaging old material for a grieving public. He was making money, but his decisions were often short-sighted. He was a master of the quick buck, the carnival hustle. He wasn't thinking about long-term brand management or preserving Elvis's legacy. He was thinking about generating immediate cash flow, a portion of which would go directly into his pocket. His downfall began with Vernon Presley's death in 1979. Control of the estate passed to a trust, with Priscilla Presley and the National Bank of Commerce in Memphis as co-executors. Priscilla had always been wary of the Colonel. She began to ask questions. The estate was earning a lot of money, but it was also paying out a fortune, much of it to the colonel. The expenses, including taxes, were threatening to bankrupt the estate. This led to the 1980 court investigation led by Memphis probate judge Joseph W. Evans. He appointed attorney Blanchard Tual to scrutinize the colonel's dealings. Tual's report was damning. It detailed the 50% commission, which was far above any industry standard. It highlighted conflicts of interest, showing that the colonel was essentially making deals with himself on behalf of the estate, always to his own benefit. The report concluded that his management was unethical and harmful to the interests of the estate and its primary beneficiary, Lisa Marie Presley. A lawsuit was filed against him by the estate. The legal battle was complex, but the outcome was clear. In 1983, a settlement was reached. The colonel was forced to give up all his rights to any Elvis-related income. In exchange, he received a lump sum payment. His reign was officially over. Priscilla Presley and a new team took over, transforming Graceland into a major tourist attraction and managing Elvis's legacy in a far more professional and profitable way. So what did the colonel do? He retired, but he didn't disappear. He stayed in Las Vegas, a city that suited his personality perfectly. He lived at the Las Vegas Hilton, the site of so many of Elvis's triumphant concerts. He acted as a consultant for the hotel for a while, but his main occupation was gambling. He would spend hours, day after day, at the casino tables, often betting huge sums of money. It's widely believed that most of the millions he made from Elvis were lost on the roulette wheels and baccarat tables of Vegas. He remained a local character, a living piece of history. Journalists would occasionally interview him. He never admitted any wrongdoing. He always maintained he did the best job for Elvis. He never expressed regret. He never changed his story. He died in Las Vegas in 1997 at the age of 87. He had outlived his star by 20 years. He died as Colonel Tom Parker, the identity he had constructed nearly 70 years earlier. Andreas van Kuijk was long gone. What do we still wonder? How much money did he actually lose to gambling in those final years? Was it tens of millions? Did he feel a sense of freedom after the estate lawsuit, or was it the ultimate defeat? And did he ever visit Graceland as a tourist after he lost control, just to see what had become of the kingdom he helped build and nearly destroyed? Number 13, why did he sell Elvis's entire back catalog for a pittance? This is one of the most controversial and, in hindsight, financially catastrophic decisions of the colonel's career. In 1973, in a deal with RCA Records, he sold the rights to every recording Elvis had made up to that point. This included all the master tapes for classic hits like Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, Jailhouse Rock, and Can't Help Falling in Love. He sold the entire golden archive. The total price was around $5,400,000. After taxes and the colonel taking his massive cut, Elvis walked away with only about $1,350,000. Today that sounds insane. The back catalog of an artist like Elvis is worth hundreds of millions, possibly billions of dollars in long-term royalties and licensing fees. Every time one of those songs is streamed, sold, or used in a movie, it generates money. To sell it all for what amounted to a one-time cash payment seems like managerial malpractice of the highest order. So why did he do it? The colonel's official explanation was that it was a brilliant move. He argued that they were selling old assets to finance new projects. The money helped fund the upcoming Aloha from Hawaii satellite television special, a hugely ambitious and expensive project. He also claimed that the deal was structured so that Elvis would get a better royalty rate on future recordings. He framed it as clearing the decks and looking toward the future, but the real reasons are likely much darker and more selfish. By 1973, the colonel had a severe and escalating gambling problem. He was a fixture in the Las Vegas casinos, particularly the Hilton, where Elvis was performing. He was known to lose enormous sums of money in a single night. Some reports suggest his debts to the Hilton casino ran into the millions. A huge quick cash infusion would have been very attractive to a man in that position. The sale provided that. It was a massive windfall, half of which before his share of taxes went straight to him. It allowed him to settle his debts and continue his high-stakes lifestyle. There was another, more strategic reason. The deal was structured to pay Elvis a lump sum. This meant the colonel also received a huge lump sum. If Elvis's income came from steady, smaller royalty checks over decades, the colonel's income would be the same. But a single multi-million-dollar payment was something else entirely. It was a massive score. It fit his carnival huckster mentality Go for the big prize, the immediate payoff, rather than the slow, steady build. He wasn't thinking about Elvis's financial security in the 1990s or 2000s. He was thinking about the cash in his hand in 1973. It also reveals his fundamental misunderstanding of the music business's future. The Colonel came from the world of live events and one-off deals. He didn't grasp the concept of intellectual property as a long-term, appreciating asset. To him, a song was old once it was off the charts. He saw the back catalog as a used car, something to be sold for a quick profit before it lost more value. He couldn't foresee the coming eras of CDs, digital downloads, streaming, and endless commercial licensing that would make those old recordings more valuable than ever. Elvis himself, deep in the grip of his prescription drug dependency and trusting the Colonel implicitly in all business matters, likely didn't understand the full implications of what he was signing away. He saw a check for over $1 million and was probably told it was a great deal. He had no reason to doubt the man who had guided his entire career. He signed the papers. It was a decision that would cost his estate an unimaginable fortune in the decades to come. So what are the lingering questions? Did anyone at RCA try to tell the Colonel he was making a huge mistake, or were they just happy to get such an incredible deal? Was the deal explicitly structured to pay off a specific gambling debt the Colonel had with the Las Vegas Hilton? And did Elvis, in his more lucid moments, ever express regret or even realize the true scale of what he had given away? Number 12. What did he really do during the 68? Come back. The 1968 television special, officially titled Singer Presents, is one of the most important moments in Elvis Presley's career. It was his resurrection after years of making terrible movies and being largely absent from the music scene. This show reminded the world that he was a powerful, relevant, and magnetic performer. But the Colonel's role in this triumph is complex and often misunderstood. He almost prevented it from happening. The Colonel's vision for the special was safe, predictable, and completely out of touch. He wanted a traditional Christmas show. He saw Elvis dressed in a tuxedo, standing by a fireplace, singing holiday standards like Silent Night, and A Little Town of Bethlehem. The show's sponsor, Singer Sewing Machines, was on board with this cozy, family-friendly concept. It was meant to be a pleasant, forgettable hour of television that wouldn't offend anyone. It was the Colonel's way low-risk, guaranteed paycheck. The show's producer, Bob Finkel, hired a young, rebellious director named Steve Binder. Binder had a different idea. He saw the lingering fire in Elvis. He didn't want to produce a Christmas card. He wanted to produce a rock and roll show. He wanted to capture the raw energy of the young Elvis that had been buried under years of Hollywood schlock. This created a direct conflict. The Colonel fought Binder every step of the way. When Binder and his musical director, Bones Howe, suggested opening the show with a new socially conscious song called If I Can Dream, the Colonel was appalled. It was too political. It wasn't what they had agreed on. He resisted the idea of the informal segment where Elvis would jam with his old bandmates Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana. He absolutely hated the black leather outfit. He thought it was unprofessional and a throwback to Elvis's dangerous image from the 1950s, an image the Colonel had worked hard to sanitize. According to Steve Binder's own accounts, documented in his book Elvis 68 Comeback, the story of the special, the Colonel was a constant obstructive presence. He would send memos. He would argue with the creative team. He felt he was losing control of his client. At one point, the battle of wills got so intense that the Colonel threatened to pull Elvis from the show. So what did he really do? For the most part, he tried to stop the very things that made the special iconic. His contribution was largely negative. He was the force of conservatism and commercial caution that the creative team had to overcome. However, there is one crucial point. Elvis, for one of the few times in his career, stood his ground. Encouraged by Binder and his friend Jerry Schilling, Elvis found the courage to defy his manager. He told the Colonel he believed in Binder's vision. He wanted to do the show their way. Faced with a resolute Elvis, the Colonel did something that was, in its own way, a mark of his strange genius. He backed down. He realized he could not win this fight without alienating his star. So he pivoted. He let Binder and Elvis have their way, but he made sure he was still in charge of the business side. Once he saw the finished product and realized it was going to be a massive hit, he took full credit for it. He acted as if the raw, electrifying show was his idea all along. He used its success to negotiate the lucrative Las Vegas residency deal that would define the final phase of Elvis's career. So his role was paradoxical. He created the opportunity by booking the special. He then tried to sabotage its creative direction. When he failed, he expertly capitalized on its success. He was both the villain and the beneficiary of the story. Without his initial deal, there would have been no show. But without the rebellion of Steve Binder and Elvis Presley, the show would have been a forgettable Christmas special, and Elvis's comeback might never have happened. The questions that remain are fascinating. What would have happened if Elvis hadn't found the courage to stand up to him? Simply faded away after a bland Christmas show? Did the Colonel secretly admire what Binder and Elvis had created, or did he always resent them for proving him wrong? And did this brief moment of rebellion plant a seed of doubt in Elvis's mind about his manager's infallibility? Number 11. How deep did his gambling addiction run? It was not just a hobby, it was an obsession that consumed his life, and very likely a huge portion of Elvis Presley's fortune. Colonel Parker's gambling addiction, particularly in the last decade of Elvis's life and the years after, was monumental. It was the driving force behind many of his most questionable business decisions. The gambling started long before Las Vegas, but the city became his natural habitat. When Elvis began his residency at the International Hotel, later the Las Vegas Hilton in 1969, the Colonel was given the ultimate perk, an unlimited line of credit at the casino. He had a permanent suite at the hotel and spent a significant amount of his time not watching Elvis's show, but at the casino tables downstairs. He was known to play for hours on end, often losing staggering amounts of money. His game of choice was often roulette. He would bet on similar numbers, a high-risk, high-reward strategy that usually resulted in massive losses. He was what the casinos call a high roller who is given lavish treatment because they lose so much money. Eyewitnesses from the Memphis Mafia, like Lamar Fike, described seeing the Colonel lose $1 million in a single night. These were not rare occurrences. This addiction explains so much about his management in the 1970s. It explains the grueling pace of Elvis's concert schedule. Elvis would often perform 2 shows a night for weeks on end. It was exhausting and damaging to his health, but it generated a constant stream of cash. And a constant stream of cash was exactly what the Colonel needed to feed his habit. The more Elvis worked, the more the Colonel could gamble. It also provides the most logical reason for the 1973 sale of Elvis's back catalog. The $5,400,000 deal provided a sudden, massive injection of cash. The Colonel needed it. A report prepared for the Presley estate during the 1980s litigation estimated that the Colonel's gambling losses at the Las Vegas Hilton alone may have exceeded $30 million. It's a shocking figure. The hotel essentially owned him. This created a huge conflict of interest. How could the Colonel negotiate the best deal for Elvis with the Hilton when he owed the casino a fortune? And he couldn't. He was compromised. He kept Elvis working at the Hilton, trapped in a cycle of performances that paid off his manager's debts. Baron Hilton, the head of the Hilton hotel chain, was once asked about the Colonel's gambling. His response, as quoted in Alana Nash's The Colonel, was chillingly simple. He said the Colonel was not the hotel's biggest loser, but he was the most consistent. He was a steady source of income for the casino. After Elvis died, the addiction did not stop. He lived out his days in Las Vegas, a ghost haunting the casinos. The money he got from the estate settlement likely evaporated at the tables. He went from being one of the most powerful men in entertainment to just another old man feeding coins into a slot machine or placing chips on a roulette table. It was a sad, compulsive end. The addiction was the engine of his greed. It wasn't just about accumulating wealth, it was about generating cash flow to cover his losses. He treated Elvis not as an artist, but as his own private ATM. The more Elvis's health declined in the mid-1970s, the harder the Colonel pushed him to perform. There were tours and concerts that a clearly unwell Elvis should have canceled. But the Colonel needed the money. The show had to go on because his bets had to be covered. In this light, the addiction wasn't just a personal failing, it was a destructive force that directly contributed to Elvis's physical decline. So what are the unanswered questions? Does the Hilton Hotel have records detailing the exact amount of the Colonel's lifetime losses? Did Elvis ever directly confront him about his gambling, or was it a forbidden topic? And how much of the money that should have gone to Elvis's future and his daughter's inheritance was simply spun away on a roulette wheel in the middle of the desert? Number 10, did he love Elvis like a son? This is perhaps the most human and difficult question to answer about their relationship. It was a strange, complex bond that lasted for 22 years. On the surface, it was purely business. The Colonel often referred to Elvis as my client or my attraction. He famously said, I don't wiggle my hips, he does, I just handle the business. This kind of talk made him sound cold, detached, and purely motivated by money. And in many ways he was. His actions often showed a complete disregard for Elvis's well-being, both artistic and personal. He pushed him to make a string of terrible, formulaic movies in the 1960s because they were low risk and guaranteed a profit. He didn't care that they were soul-crushing for Elvis as an actor. He pushed him through grueling concert schedules in the 1970s when Elvis was visibly sick and exhausted. He never intervened to stop Elvis's growing prescription drug abuse. A father figure, a true friend, would have stepped in. The Colonel did not. His priority was always ensuring the show would go on. The cash flow could not be interrupted. Members of Elvis's inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, had a front row seat to this dynamic. Many of them, in their later books and interviews, expressed the belief that the Colonel did not love Elvis at all. But they saw him as a user, a manipulator, who isolated Elvis and took advantage of his loyalty and trust. They saw how the Colonel controlled every aspect of his life, from business deals to personal appearances, leaving Elvis trapped in a golden cage. However, there is another side to the story. Elvis chose to stay with the Colonel for his entire career. He was famously loyal, but he wasn't stupid. He could have left. In the beginning, the Colonel provided a kind of stability and direction that Elvis and his family desperately needed. He took a naive country boy and his parents and guided them through the dizzying maze of superstardom. He protected them from the countless sharks in the industry while acting as the biggest shark himself. He made them rich beyond their wildest dreams. For a young man who grew up in poverty, this was huge. Elvis often called him Admiral or the Old Man, terms of endearment and respect. There were moments of what looked like genuine affection. The Colonel would give Elvis extravagant gifts. They had inside jokes, they shared a background as outsiders who had made it big. They both understood the world of the carnival, the spectacle, the audience. In a way, they were partners in the creation of the Elvis Presley phenomenon. Perhaps the Colonel loved the creation, if not the man. The truth is probably somewhere in the murky middle. It was not a simple father-son relationship, it was a deeply codependent one. The Colonel needed Elvis for money, purpose, and the validation of his own genius as a promoter. Elvis needed the Colonel to handle the parts of life. He didn't want to deal with the contracts, the negotiations, the dirty work. The Colonel was the barrier between Elvis and the real world. This allowed Elvis to live in his bubble, but it also stunted his growth as an adult. A biographer, Peter Guralnick, in his book Careless Love, paints a picture of a relationship that soured over time. The early partnership gave way to a cynical, exploitative arrangement in the later years. Any affection that might have existed was buried under the weight of the Colonel's gambling addiction and Elvis's drug dependency. They were two men trapped in a cycle, unable to escape each other. Maybe the Colonel did have a twisted, possessive kind of love for Elvis. It was the love a collector has for a priceless object. He polished it, displayed it, profited from it, and kept it locked away so no one else could have it. It was a love based on ownership, not empathy. It was not the love a father has for a son. It was the love a carny has for his prize attraction. So what do we still not know? In their private moments, with no one else around, what was the tone of their conversations? Did the Colonel ever offer genuine fatherly advice that had nothing to do with business? And does a single letter or note exist from the Colonel to Elvis that expresses something beyond a business arrangement, something truly personal? Number 9. Did he sabotage Elvis's movie career? Sabotage is a strong word. It implies a deliberate intent to cause failure. The Colonel would have argued he did the opposite. He made Elvis Presley a huge movie star. And by the numbers, he was right. Elvis starred in 31 feature films between 1956 and 1969. Most of them were financially successful. They kept Elvis in the public eye and generated enormous amounts of money for him and the Colonel. But if you look at it from an artistic perspective, the answer looks very different. The Colonel absolutely crippled Elvis's potential as a serious actor. He didn't sabotage the career's profitability, but he did sabotage its quality and its soul. Elvis had real acting talent. His early films like King Creole, 1958, showed genuine promise. Critics took notice. He had charisma, vulnerability, and a natural screen presence. He wanted to be a great actor like his idols James Dean and Marlon Brando. He hoped to get challenging roles that would allow him to grow. The Colonel had a completely different plan. His strategy was based on a simple, repeatable, and low-risk formula. The Elvis movie became a genre unto itself. Elvis plays a charming guy, a race car driver, a boat captain, a pilot, gets into some light trouble, sings 10 to 12 forgettable songs, and gets the girl in the end. The plots were interchangeable. The soundtracks were often terrible. The movies were shot quickly and cheaply. Like, why did he do this? For the Colonel, movies were not art. They were products. They were a delivery system for soundtrack albums. Each movie guaranteed a new album, which meant more sales for RCA and more commissions for him. A serious, dramatic film might not have room for a dozen songs. A risky, challenging role might alienate some of the audience. The Colonel's formula was safe, it worked, it made money, and for him that was the only metric that mattered. He famously had a contract writer that specified Elvis's salary, the number of songs to be included, and the percentage of profits. The script was a secondary concern. He turned down several roles that could have changed the trajectory of Elvis's acting career. The most famous example is West Side Story. Elvis was considered for the role of Tony. It was a serious musical with a classic score. The Colonel reportedly turned it down because the deal wasn't right for him. He also rejected an offer for Elvis to co-star with Barbra Streisand in the 1976 remake of A Star is Born. The producer, John Peters, desperately wanted Elvis for the part. It would have been a gritty, dramatic role perfect for the older, more world-weary Elvis. But the Colonel demanded top billing over Streisand and an outrageous amount of money. The deal fell through, and the part went to Chris Christopherson. This was his pattern. He protected his financial interests above all else. He wasn't interested in co-starring roles, even with major stars. Elvis had to be the only star. The deal had to be on his terms. This cut Elvis off from opportunities to work with great directors and actors who could have pushed him and helped him develop his craft. By the mid-1960s, Elvis himself hated the movies he was making. He felt like a joke. He would complain to his friends in the Memphis Mafia about the terrible scripts and songs, but he felt powerless to stop it. He was trapped in multi-picture deals that the Colonel had signed. He was on a treadmill, churning out one piece of fluff after another. It was artistically soul-destroying and contributed to his depression and growing reliance on prescription drugs. So yes, in a very real sense, he did sabotage Elvis's movie career. He traded artistic integrity for a guaranteed paycheck. He took a promising actor and turned him into a highly paid caricature. He built a successful business, but he killed an artist's dream in the process. What are the lingering questions? What other major film roles did the Colonel turn down on Elvis's behalf that we don't know about? Was there a single movie script during the 1960s that the Colonel personally championed because he thought it was good, not just profitable? And if Elvis had made A Star is Born, could that success have given him the confidence to finally fire the Colonel and take control of his own career? Number 8, was he a U.S. Army deserter? Yes, this is not a theory or speculation. It is a documented fact. The man who called himself Colonel Tom Parker was, under his birth name Andreas van Kuijk, a deserter from the United States Army. This single event is a crucial piece of the puzzle. It helps explain his illegal status, his name change, and his fear of ever leaving the country. When Andreas van Kuijk arrived in America in 1929, he needed a way to disappear and create a new life. The Army was a perfect solution. He enlisted on May 17, 1929, using the name Tom Parker. He claimed he was born in West Virginia. The Army at that time was not as stringent about background checks and birth certificates. He was assigned to the 64th Coast Artillery at Fort Shafter in Hawaii. His military career was not distinguished. He served for a few years, but it seems he was not cut out for the rigid discipline of Army life. The exact details of what happened are murky, but the outcome is clear. At some point, he went absent without leave of war. This was a serious offense. He was eventually caught and charged, but things got worse. The Army records, uncovered by his biographer Alana Nash, paint a grim picture. He was diagnosed with a psychosis, psychogenic depression, acute by an Army psychiatrist. The report noted he was unstable and suffered from anxiety. He was worried about being discovered as a foreign national. He was kept in solitary confinement for a time. The Army decided he was unfit for service. He was not given an honorable discharge. He was discharged for his psychological condition. but the desertion charge hung over him. In the eyes of the military, he had abandoned his post. This event had profound consequences that shaped the rest of his life. First, it made him a wanted man, at least in the eyes of the military. A deserter could face prison time. He had to keep a low profile. Second, it solidified his need to hide his true identity. If he were ever identified as Andreas van Kuijk, his fraudulent enlistment and desertion would be exposed. He had to be Tom Parker, the civilian, the carnival worker, the manager. He could never be Andreas van Kuijk, the ex-soldier, again. Most importantly, it trapped him in the United States. A deserter could not get a passport. If he applied for one, his military record would be checked. The name Tom Parker would be flagged. The whole house of cards would come tumbling down. This is the single most compelling reason why he never allowed Elvis to tour internationally. It was never about security concerns or logistics, as he often claimed. It was about him. He, the manager, could not travel, and his ego and his need for control were so great that he would not allow Elvis to go without him. He was willing to sacrifice the millions of dollars and the global adoration that a world tour would have brought, all to protect his 60-year-old secret. The irony is staggering. The man known as the Colonel, a title that projects military authority and patriotism, was in fact a deserter who had been kicked out of the army for psychological instability. It was one of his most audacious and long-running cons. He wore the fake title as a shield, and it worked so well that no one thought to look into the military record of the man named Tom Parker. They just assumed it was legitimate. So, what do we still wonder? What exactly happened during his time in Hawaii that led to his breakdown and desertion? Was it a single traumatic event or a gradual decline? Did any of the other soldiers in his unit suspect he was not who he said he was? And how close did the army ever come to catching him and prosecuting him before he was discharged? Number 7, did he really discover Elvis? No. This is a common misconception, a piece of the myth that the Colonel carefully cultivated himself. That Colonel Parker did not walk into a small club and find an unknown singer. He did not discover the raw talent of Elvis Presley. He saw a rocket that was already taking off, and he figured out a way to get into the cockpit and steer it. The person who truly discovered Elvis was Sam Phillips, the founder of Sun Records in Memphis. Phillips was a visionary producer who was searching for a white singer who could sing with the feel and passion of the black rhythm and blues artists he was recording. In 1954, a young truck driver named Elvis Presley walked into his studio to record a song for his mother. Phillips saw a spark. After a few false starts during one legendary recording session, Elvis, along with guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, launched into an impromptu, sped-up version of an old blues song called That's All Right. Phillips knew he had found his sound, he recorded it, released it, and a regional phenomenon was born. For the next year, Elvis's career was managed by a Memphis radio personality named Bob Neal. Scotty Moore was also heavily involved in the business side. They were the ones doing the early work. They booked the gigs at small clubs and high school auditoriums. They got him on the Louisiana Hayride, a popular radio show that broadcasts his music across the region. Elvis was already building a fanatical following in the South. He was selling records. He was causing riots with his stage performances. The fire was already lit. The Colonel was, at this time, managing country stars like Hank Snow and Eddie Arnold. He was a successful promoter, but he was looking for the next big thing. He heard about Elvis. He saw him perform. And like the shrewd carny he was, he recognized the scale of what was happening. He didn't see a country singer or a blues singer. He saw a once-in-a-generation attraction. He saw a gold mine. His process was not one of discovery, but of acquisition. It was a hostile takeover. He started by muscling his way in, first as a special advisor to Bob Neal. He used his connections to get Elvis bigger bookings and a screen test. He demonstrated his power and influence. He made himself indispensable. He slowly and methodically pushed Neal and Moore out of the picture. His masterstroke was convincing RCA Records to buy Elvis's contract from the small Sun Records label. The price, $35,000, was unheard of at the time. Sam Phillips needed the money to keep his independent label afloat. The Colonel brokered the deal. This move took Elvis from a regional star to a national one. Once Elvis was on a major label with a massive distribution and promotion budget, his fame exploded. At the same time, he was working on Elvis's parents, Vernon and Gladys. As Alana Nash details in her biography, he charmed them and overwhelmed them. He promised to protect their son and make him the biggest star in the world. They were simple people, unequipped to deal with the complexities of the music business. The Colonel seemed like a savior. In late 1955, they fired Bob Neal and signed an exclusive management contract with the Colonel. The takeover was complete. So the Colonel's genius was not in finding the talent, but in recognizing its limitless potential and then ruthlessly securing total control over it. Sam Phillips found the artist. Bob Neal nurtured the early career. The Colonel was the one who built the empire. He didn't discover Elvis, he annexed him. What are the lingering questions? What would Elvis's career have looked like if he had stayed with Sam Phillips at Sun Records? Would he have remained a more authentic, raw rock and roll artist? Did Bob Neal ever regret not fighting harder to keep his client? And was there a single moment when Elvis realized the Colonel was taking over? And did he welcome it or simply feel powerless to stop it? Number 6, where did the Colonel come from? The title was a complete fabrication, but it was one of the most effective tools in his arsenal. It was a piece of marketing genius. It gave him an air of authority, respectability, and power that Tom Parker, manager, never could have. The story of how he got it is a perfect example of his ability to turn a minor event into a lifelong persona. The year was 1948. At this point, Tom Parker was already a successful manager in the country music world. His main client was the hugely popular singer Eddie Arnold. Parker was also heavily involved in music promotion and political hobnobbing. He knew how to build relationships with powerful people. One of these people was Jimmy Davis, a popular country singer who had a second career in politics. Davis was running for governor of Louisiana. He was famous for his song, "You Are My Sunshine." Parker offered his services to the campaign. He used his promotional skills to help get Davis elected. He called in favors, organized events, and made sure his star, Eddie Arnold, was seen supporting the candidate. When Davis won the election, he wanted to thank Parker for his help. In Louisiana, as in some other southern states, the governor has the power to bestow honorary titles. On June 20th, 1948, Governor Jimmy Davis officially made Tom Parker an honorary colonel in the Louisiana State Militia. For most people, this would have been a nice little plaque to hang on the wall, a fun story to tell. For Parker, it was a transformation. He immediately began insisting that everyone call him the Colonel. He had stationery printed with his new title. He introduced himself as Colonel Tom Parker. He made it part of his name, part of his identity. He understood the power of a title. In the post-World War II era, a military title, even an honorary one, carried immense weight. It suggested discipline, strategy, and leadership. It was a brilliant con. It elevated him from the slightly disreputable world of carnival workers and music promoters. And it made him sound like a man in command. Like when he walked into a negotiation with record executives or movie producers, he wasn't just Tom Parker. He was the Colonel. It was intimidating, it was memorable, it helped create the myth of the all-powerful, brilliant manager. He played the part to the hilt. He was often seen with a cane, not because he needed it, but because it looked like something a southern gentleman or a military man might carry. He was loud, bombastic, and always in charge. The title became a self-fulfilling prophecy. He acted like a colonel, so people treated him like one. Elvis always called him Colonel. The press called him Colonel. Everyone in the entertainment industry called him Colonel. He effectively willed the persona into existence. The fact that it was completely unearned by any military service was a detail he conveniently omitted. As discussed earlier, the irony is that his actual military service was a disaster that ended in desertion and a psychological discharge. The honorary title was the perfect cover. It replaced a shameful truth with a respectable fiction. The title was a shield. It kept people at a distance. It discouraged personal questions. Who would dare to ask a colonel about his childhood or where he was born? It was all part of the grand illusion he constructed around himself, an illusion that allowed a Dutch immigrant named Andreas van Kuijk to become one of the most powerful men in American entertainment. So, what are the lingering questions? Did Governor Jimmy Davis have any idea of the monster he was creating when he signed that certificate? Did any of Parker's early associates in the carnival world laugh when he first started demanding to be called Colonel? And did he ever, in a moment of weakness admit to anyone that the whole thing was a charade. Number 5. Why did Elvis never tour the world? This is one of the great tragedies of Elvis Presley's career and a source of endless frustration for his millions of fans outside of North America. Elvis was a global superstar. His records sold all over the world. He had a massive devoted following in Europe, Asia, Australia, and South America. A world tour in the 1960s or 1970s would have been a monumental cultural event. It would have generated a fortune, yet it never happened. With the exception of a few concerts in Canada in 1957, Elvis Presley never performed a single show outside the United States. The reason was simple and selfish Colonel Tom Parker. The official excuses the Colonel gave over the years were varied and nonsensical. He would claim that the security risks were too great. He would say that the venues in other countries were not up to his standards. He would argue that foreign promoters couldn't afford their asking price. He once famously said, "Why should we go to them when they will pay to come here?" All of these were smokescreens. The biggest stars in the world, from the Beatles to Frank Sinatra, toured internationally without these issues. The logistics were complex, but not impossible. The real reason Elvis was kept a prisoner in his own country was that his manager could not leave. As we've established, Colonel Tom Parker was an illegal immigrant. He was Andreas van Kuijk, a citizen of the Netherlands. He had no passport. He could not apply for one because he had no birth certificate to prove his American identity. His entire life was built on the fiction that he was Tom Parker from West Virginia. A passport application would have required a level of official scrutiny that his fake identity could not withstand. It would have exposed his fraudulent army enlistment and his desertion. It would have revealed everything. So he couldn't leave the United States. If he did, he would likely not be allowed back in. And the Colonel's ego was far too big to let Elvis tour the world without him. He had to be there, in person, to control every detail, to make the deals, to collect the money. The idea of Elvis being on another continent, surrounded by other managers and promoters, was unthinkable to him. He would lose control. This selfish need to protect his secret cost Elvis dearly. It cut him off from a huge part of his fan base. It denied him the creative energy and excitement that comes from performing for new audiences and new cultures. Imagine Elvis in London in the 1960s meeting the Beatles. Imagine him in Tokyo in the 1970s causing a cultural sensation. These are iconic moments in music history that never happened, all because of his manager's fraudulent identity. The closest Elvis ever came to a world event was the 1973 Aloha from Hawaii concert. The Colonel hyped this as a global first, a concert broadcast live around the world via satellite. And it was a technological marvel for its time, but it was also a clever solution to his problem. It was a way to reach a global audience without ever having to leave US soil. It was a world tour that stayed home. It generated huge ratings and a lot of money, but it was a substitute for the real thing. Elvis himself desperately wanted to tour Europe. He talked about it often with his friends. He wanted to see the castles in Germany he had only seen as a GI. He wanted to play the London Palladium. But every time the subject came up, the Colonel would shut it down with one of his excuses. And Elvis, ever loyal and non-confrontational with his manager, would let it drop. It's one of the clearest examples of how the Colonel's personal baggage directly limited and damaged Elvis's career. So, what do we still wonder? Was there ever a plan put in place by anyone else to try and get Elvis a passport and tour without the Colonel? And how did he find out and stop it? Did any high-level government officials know the Colonel's secret and agree to look the other way? And what was the private conversation like when Elvis, after his army service in Germany, asked the Colonel, "When are we going to play for the fans I made over here?" Number 4, was Andreas van Kuijk a murderer on the run? This is the darkest and most explosive question surrounding Colonel Tom Parker. It's a theory, but it's a theory supported by a disturbing amount of circumstantial evidence. The theory is this: in 1929, just before he fled the Netherlands forever, a 20-year-old Andreas van Kuijk killed a woman in his hometown of Breda. His sudden secret departure for America was not an act of ambition. It was the act of a fugitive escaping justice. The story was painstakingly researched by biographer Alana Nash for her book, The Colonel. She traveled to Breda and uncovered a chilling, unsolved crime. On the evening of May 17, 1929, a 23-year-old newlywed named Anna van den Enden was brutally murdered inside her home. She ran a small grocery store with her husband. She was attacked from behind and bludgeoned to death with a heavy object. The cash box was open and empty. It looked like a robbery gone wrong. The murder weapon was never found. The killer was never caught. The case remains officially unsolved to this day. Now, here are the connections to Andreas van Kuijk. He lived in the same neighborhood. He knew the victim and her husband. The murder happened on the very same night that his family says he disappeared. He left in a hurry, taking nothing with him and telling no one where he was going. He just vanished. The timing is, to say the least, highly suspicious. There's more. The murder scene was described as being incredibly bloody and messy. The killer would have been covered in blood. One of the few things Andreas was known to have done before he disappeared was to go to the farm where his uncle worked and ask for a bucket of water to wash up. He was also known to have a volatile temper. The motive could have been robbery. Andreas worked at carnivals and was always looking for quick money. Perhaps he went to rob the store, the victim recognized him, and he panicked. This would explain the brutality of the attack. For the rest of his life, Tom Parker exhibited behaviors that could be interpreted as those of a man with a terrible secret. His refusal to ever return to the Netherlands, even for his parents' funerals, is the most obvious. His creation of a completely new identity and his efforts to erase his past go beyond what a typical immigrant might do. He also had a known aversion to being photographed or fingerprinted when he could avoid it. And in conversations, if anyone ever got too close to his past, he would become angry and defensive. Was this just the behavior of an illegal immigrant protecting his status, or was it something more? Was it the behavior of a man terrified of being extradited for murder? There is no smoking gun. No one ever confessed. No DNA evidence exists from that time. It's all circumstantial. But the pieces fit together in a deeply unsettling way. The timing of his flight, the proximity to the crime, the nature of his disappearance, and his lifelong behavior all point in the same direction. It provides the only truly compelling reason for such an absolute and permanent break with his home, his family, and his own name. Fleeing poverty is one thing. Fleeing a murder charge is another. If the theory is true, it recasts his entire life story. He wasn't just a clever con man, he was a fugitive from justice. His control over Elvis, his refusal to let him tour, his entire paranoid and secretive existence, it was all driven by a primal fear of being discovered and sent back to the Netherlands to face a murder trial. The man who managed the king of rock and roll may have been a killer. It's a mind-bending possibility. So, what are the lingering questions? Are there Dutch police files on the Anne van den Enden case that contain details never made public? Did anyone in his family in the Netherlands ever suspect that his disappearance was connected to the murder? And is it possible that the psychological trauma of such a violent act is what led to his army breakdown and his diagnosis of psychosis just a few years later? Number 3, did he kill Elvis Presley? He did not hold a gun to his head or a pillow over his face. But in a moral and ethical sense, did Colonel Tom Parker's actions directly lead to Elvis's premature death at the age of 42? Many of the people closest to Elvis believe the answer is yes. Elvis Presley died of a heart attack on August 16, 1977. His health had been in a shocking state of decline for years. He was overweight, lethargic, and addicted to a massive cocktail of prescription drugs. He was not a well man, yet he was forced to keep working, to keep touring, to keep performing. The person who kept him on that treadmill was the Colonel. The case for the Colonel's culpability is strong. First, there was the workload. In the 1970s, the Colonel booked Elvis on an almost non-stop tour of the United States. The schedule was brutal. It was city after city, show after show. This relentless pace was necessary to generate the cash flow needed to fund the Colonel's catastrophic gambling addiction. A manager with the artist's best interests at heart would have insisted on long breaks for rest and recovery. So the Colonel did the opposite. He pushed Elvis harder as his health got worse. There are numerous documented instances of Elvis being unfit to perform. His friends and band members would tell the Colonel that Elvis was too sick, that the show needed to be canceled. The Colonel's response was almost always the same. The only thing that's important is that he's on that stage tonight. He would order doctors to give Elvis whatever he needed to get him through the 2 hours on stage. This enabled and encouraged the very drug abuse that was killing him. Second, the Colonel actively isolated Elvis from anyone who might be a bad influence, which often meant anyone who might tell Elvis the truth. He created a bubble around Elvis, and he was the gatekeeper. He could have used this power to stage an intervention. He could have insisted that Elvis go to rehab. He had the contractual and personal authority to do so. He never did. Why? Because a year in rehab would mean a year of no income. The colonel's financial needs came before Elvis's health needs. Third, he killed his spirit. The terrible movies of the 1960s and the repetitive Las Vegas shows of the 1970s were creatively bankrupt. Elvis was bored. He felt trapped. He wanted new challenges like the A Star is Born role that the colonel denied him. This artistic frustration led to depression, which he medicated with pills and food. The colonel didn't just work his body to death, he may have starved his soul to death as well. Members of the Memphis Mafia, like Red and Sonny West, were so alarmed by Elvis's decline that they wrote a tell-all book, Elvis What Happened, which was published just before his death. They hoped it would be a wake-up call. The colonel did nothing. He viewed it as a betrayal, not a cry for help. The counter-argument, of course, is that Elvis was a grown man who made his own choices. No one forced him to take the pills. He could have fired the colonel at any time. This is true, but it ignores the complex, decades-long psychological hold the colonel had over him. Elvis was conditioned to trust the colonel, to defer to his judgment. By the end, he was a sick, isolated man, not in a position to fight the dominant figure who had controlled his life since he was 20 years old. The colonel didn't pull the trigger, but he loaded the gun, handed it to Elvis, and then looked the other way for years while making sure the cash register was still ringing. He presided over Elvis's long, slow-motion suicide and profited from it every step of the way. That is a heavy moral burden to bear. So, what are the ultimate unanswered questions? Did the colonel ever have a moment of private guilt after Elvis died? A realization that he could have done more? What would have happened if a doctor had refused the colonel's orders and declared Elvis unfit to perform? And if Elvis had lived, would he have eventually found the strength to break free, or would the destructive relationship have continued until the colonel died? Number 2, why did he take 50%? It is the most infamous number in the history of music management. 50%. Or a full half of everything Elvis Presley ever earned. It's a figure so outrageously high that it beggars belief. The standard commission for a music manager was, and still is, between 10 and 20%. For that, a manager guides a career, books gigs, and negotiates contracts. The colonel demanded 50%, and he got it for 22 years. How did he justify it, and how did he get away with it? His justification was simple and audacious. He told Elvis and his father Vernon that he was not just a manager. He was a full partner. He claimed that his dedication would be so total, his work so all-encompassing, that he deserved to be an equal. He presented it as a 50-50 split in a joint venture called Elvis Presley. He was the business mind, Elvis was the talent. Together they were a team. You have to remember the context. In 1955, Elvis was 20 years old. His father, Vernon, had a limited education and no experience in high finance or entertainment law. They were suddenly dealing with a world of contracts and money that was completely foreign to them. The colonel, with his confident, commanding presence, seemed like a protector. He convinced them that the world was full of people who would try to cheat them, and that he was the only one they could trust. The 50% was his price for that total loyalty. The contract itself was a work of art from his perspective. It wasn't just 50% of concert fees. It was 50% of everything. Record royalties, movie salaries, merchandise, television appearances. If Elvis's name or image was used to make $1, the colonel got 50 cents of it. And it's important to note that this was 50% of the gross income, not the net. That means the colonel took his half before any expenses were paid. All the costs of touring paying the band, the travel, the equipment paying came out of Elvis's 50% share. In reality, the split was often closer to 70-30 or even 80-20 in the colonel's favor. How did he get away with it for so long? Loyalty and control. Elvis was intensely loyal to the people who were there in the beginning. He saw the colonel as the man who made him a star, who made him rich. He felt indebted to him. The colonel also systematically isolated Elvis from outside business advice. He fired people who questioned his authority. He created an environment where his word was law. Elvis likely never knew just how abnormal his management deal was. He had no point of comparison. The colonel's carny background was key. In the carnival world, the grift or the con is part of the game. You try to get as much as you can. A 50-50 split with the owner of an attraction was not unheard of in that world. He simply applied the ethics of the carnival midway to the biggest star in the world. He saw Elvis as his main attraction, the one that would make him rich, and he wrote himself the best deal imaginable. This deal had devastating consequences. It meant that Elvis had to work constantly just to maintain his lavish lifestyle. It put him under immense financial pressure, and it was the primary motivation for many of the Colonel's worst decisions, from the endless stream of bad movies to the grueling tours that destroyed Elvis's health. Every decision was filtered through a simple question: what makes the most money for me? The 50% commission corrupted the entire relationship and turned it from one of management into one of pure exploitation. It was a deal made in heaven for the Colonel and a deal that led to hell for Elvis. What are the lingering questions? Did any lawyer or advisor for RCA or the movie studios ever tell Vernon Presley that a 50% deal was insane? Why didn't Elvis, after becoming more worldly and experienced, ever try to renegotiate the contract to a more reasonable rate? And how much more money would Elvis's estate be worth today if he had been under a standard 15% management deal his entire career? The number would be astronomical. Number one, was he a genius or just a lucky carny? This is the ultimate question, the one that encompasses all the others. Was Colonel Tom Parker a brilliant, visionary strategist who single-handedly created the blueprint for modern music management? Or was he just a carnival huckster who stumbled upon the greatest attraction in the world and was smart enough to hold on tight? The answer, frustratingly, is that he was both. The case for genius is strong. He understood marketing and promotion in a way that few did at the time. He wasn't just selling a singer, he was selling a brand. The idea of licensed merchandise on a massive scale was largely his innovation. Before Elvis, you didn't see lunchboxes, lipstick, and board games for pop stars. The Colonel created that market. His I Hate Elvis badges, sold right alongside the I Love Elvis ones, was a stroke of carny brilliance. He understood that controversy sells, and he was happy to profit from every angle. He engineered Elvis's move from the Small Sun Records to the giant RCA, a move that was essential for his national breakout. He masterfully handled the publicity around Elvis's Army draft, turning a potential career killer into a patriotic public relations triumph. He secured unprecedented movie deals that made Elvis a Hollywood star. He negotiated the first ever television special to be broadcast globally via satellite. These were not the moves of a simple man. They required vision, negotiation skills, and a deep understanding of mass media. He wrote the playbook that future managers like Brian Epstein for the Beatles would later follow. But the case for Lucky Carney is just as compelling. His greatest stroke of luck was Elvis Presley himself. Elvis was a force of nature, a talent so immense that he might have become a superstar with any competent manager, or even with no manager at all. You know, the Colonel didn't create the talent, he just bottled it and sold it. You know, many of his biggest genius moves were actually driven by his own limitations and greed. Keeping Elvis out of the rest of the world wasn't a strategic choice to build demand. It was a necessity born of his illegal status. The endless string of, terrible movies wasn't a clever career plan. It was, the safest, easiest way to generate quick cash with no artistic risk. The grueling tours of the 70s weren't about connecting with fans. They were about paying off his gambling debts. His management style was not about long-term career growth. It was about the short-term score, the quick buck. This is the mentality of a huckster, not a visionary. He fundamentally misunderstood the concept of a musical legacy. His sale of Elvis's entire back catalog in 1973, for a fraction of its worth, is perhaps the greatest evidence of his short-sightedness. A true genius would have understood that those recordings were Elvis's most valuable long-term asset. A carny sees an old attraction and sells it off for whatever he can get today. So, what is the verdict? He was a carny who had moments of genius. His genius was not artistic. It was purely promotional. He was a master of the hustle, the deal, the spectacle. He could sell anything, and he had the immense luck to find the greatest product in the world to sell. He was a brilliant marketer trapped by a con man's ethics. He built an empire, but he did it with cheap materials and a foundation of lies. He created a legend, but he may have destroyed the man. His story is a testament to the fact that genius and greed can live side by side in the same person, creating a legacy of both spectacular success and tragic failure. What is the final unanswerable question? If he had been a legitimate citizen, free of his dark secrets and gambling addiction, would his genius have led Elvis to even greater heights? Or was it precisely his background as a con man on the run that gave him the ruthless ambition and single-minded focus needed to build the phenomenon of Elvis Presley in the first place? Was his darkness the source of his success? We will never know.